Hey, welcome to the Gashouse Gang with Kevin Wheeler, Matt Pauley in Jupiter, Florida. I'm Tom Ackerman. We're sponsored by Game Day Men's Health. We're sponsored by Saliga Heating and Cooling. And you know what? I think Mason Wentz should bat leadoff this year. Let's get into
Well,
it.
hey, let's be honest, Tom. It's probably going to be that way. So just if we're going to put money at it, I'm going to bet on it going that way.
It was fun yesterday. That was episode 72. This is episode 73. And Matt, what's going on down in Jupiter as the Cardinals get themselves ready for action? I've got a lot of questions. Let's get you started. Give us the latest from the spring training home of the Cardinals.
Yeah, so today we saw some more live BP. Miles Michaelis, Andre Palante were among the pitchers that had some live BP sessions. We spoke, as always, as we do every day, with Oliver Marmol. It seemed like one of the big narratives today was talking about Wilson Contreras and the transition he's making over to first base and all the things that he's been doing and how it's kind of a process. And right now they're just trying to get him comfortable. I also thought it was, I'm a big believer in the small details can play out in big ways later. And I think for the most part, that's been an area that historically the Cardinals have been really good at getting the small details. And Ollie spent some time talking today about some of those details, the arrangement of lockers in the clubhouse. For example, Quinn Matthews, his locker is right next to Sonny Gray. That was done very much on purpose when they're putting together hitting groups early on in spring training. A lot of times they're trying to put certain players with other players and facilitate conversations. And, one single one of those things doesn't make all the difference in the world, but when you do all those things kind of in aggregate, it can help produce a winning organization. So those were kind of, we can go deeper on any of that stuff, but those were kind of the surface level type conversations that we were having today.
Yeah, just a little bit deeper on this, Matt, is that you'll start to discover this more and more as to which players are linking up with other players. What I mean by that is who's taking them under their wing. I'm curious what's going to happen. McGreevy, I kind of know because I don't know him personally necessarily, but having seen him already in that environment with the Cardinals, you can kind of see who he's gravitating to, but that will sort of evolve. And then the Quinn Matthews thing, and other players too. I mean, these young players, like who's going to be JJ Weatherholt's guy, or group.
So a really interesting thing is yesterday, we saw a lot of Nolan Arenado and Thomas Saggese together. And the optics on that are really interesting because Nolan Arenado might have just cost Thomas Saggese a major league job this year. But there's a long play, obviously, with Saggese. And Arenado spent a lot of time yesterday. They were over at third together. They were talking through things. And I've always been of the belief that, I know Arenado's got the reputation for being, a little gruff and things like that. I think he's a good teammate. I think he's always been there for his teammates. I think last year he made a concerted effort, especially once the offensive numbers weren't there. I remember him talking about the fact that he said, well, I'm not going to help the team with my bat. I got to help the team in other ways. And he started talking more with young players and doing things like that. But the optics of Arenado and Saggese working together and talking through things when Saggese may be at Memphis because of Arenado, I just think, that's one of the beautiful things about baseball.
Yeah, it's a good one. And Kevin, we talk numbers all the time, and numbers are a huge part of the game, but there is a human element, and it will be interesting to watch these young men and some of them older veterans kind of grow into the job with the watchful eye of those veterans.
It is. And the veterans can be helpful, right? I mean, we saw all those years where Yachty leads the way for catchers, right? But how many of those catchers went on to be much of anything? Right. Because look, it's nothing against them. He did the right thing. They just weren't at that level. And then there was no opportunity here. So it's hard because most prospects aren't going to make it. I mean, that we know based on the number. I don't know what the percentage is. What do you think, guys? 25%, 30% make it, and then maybe 10% are stars or impact players or something along those lines.
Just get into pro ball, or
no, I'm talking about prospects like these guys that are right there on the cusp. The Saggeses, the Walkers, the Gormans. Like Walker and Gorman aren't prospects. They've used up their status, but you get what I'm saying. Like it's even at that level. It's not like they all work out. Most of them don't. So it's that the influences are great for the ones that are going to stick, right? So having that. That presence of a guy. And so for example, Yachty's influence on the young pitchers was probably greater in terms of the impact on the Cardinals than it was on the catchers. Because again, nothing against those catchers. They just weren't at the level where they were going to be that guy. Although I should say, Carson Kelly's had a nice career. I mean, he's a really good player. He's going to be a 10, 12, 14-year major league player. And he got that learning because he switched to catcher. He was drafted as a third baseman. He changed to catcher in the Cardinal system. So that's a case where being around veterans and being around good instructors, but again, being around guys like Yadi can help. It can help you develop, but unless you already have the talent, it's not going to change the game. But it can help other people. And I think as an example, Yadi helping young pitchers. How many of those young pitchers we've talked about that had success got over the hump because they didn't have to worry. They didn't have to think. They could just go out there and throw their pitches because they knew that guy behind the plate knew what he was doing. I think those influences are really hard to measure, but they exist. And it's just that we got to make sure we don't try to apply it to every player because they're not all going to stick. They're not all going to make it.
No, and everybody's different in terms of the influencers as well. I mean, I remember well over a decade ago doing an event at Busch Stadium and having a panel of players. This is probably around 2011. The World Championship year. And I asked them all for a player that they look up to and who would they want to be if they couldn't be themselves. And every single one of them said Yadi. There was no doubt about it. And that was back then. They all wanted to be Yadi or Molina. And I think he's one of those that he will approach you and would approach you for sure and help out. But he's one that they all just observed. They all watched how he carried himself. No doubt. Like he'd walk in the room and they would know what the tone of that day was, or they would watch him prepare or work. Nobody would ever outwork him, and they all wanted to be that.
Tom, I know what you talked about it yesterday, how, you typically have been the spring training, the second half, right? You're down there once games have started and all that. And Matt's doing what I was doing before, which is you're there early from day one. And Matt, you didn't have the luxury of, at least not for very long, of watching like Yadi do his thing, right? Were you there for his last year?
Oh,
no, so you weren't even here yet. Yeah, not in spring training, right?
Mid-season.
So, one of my favorite things when I was going down there with pitchers and catchers was following the catchers. I liked, man, those guys were like little ducklings following their mama when Yadi was around. I mean, they followed him everywhere. They were out there before the clubhouse opened in the morning. They were out there doing their drills. They were out there doing some catching stuff. Then they would go hit, and then they'd all come back and eat. And it was like this little group just following their parent. And that's what it was. And Yadi was going to do it, so everyone was going to do it. Everybody in that catching group was going to do everything he was doing.
Those guys work so hard. I don't know if the catchers get the credit that they deserve. They put in more work than any other group of players here because, pitchers get days off from throwing and things like that. For the catchers, it's first one's in, last one's out, always being available to do things, have to do everything that you do with the pitching, but also work through your hitting. It is that is a grind. I can't imagine how badly those guys want spring training to come to an end once you're 4 or 5 weeks in.
Yeah, absolutely. Boy, and it's rough early too because you've got all those extra pitchers and I know when you're a younger catcher or when you're a new catcher, you want to catch everybody because you got to get to know them. And I think that's got to be an interesting part about Herrera and Pajes this spring too, is they know they're catching, right? Contreras is playing first base. They know they're catching. They're going to have to be the guys that catch all of the pitchers that are going to be at the big league level on a regular basis so they can get the best connection with them they can get.
Yeah, and you're going to have across the board here, we like to call it the buzzword over the last several years is accountability. Hold each other accountable. Everybody talks about that. It's probably been talked about in sports for years, but it truly is. You have to have honesty, and you have to be able to tell somebody when they're not doing something right, and you can't brush it under the rug. I think this is interesting. So I got a note from a listener, Bill Burke, who watches the show quite a bit, and said, my real concern is not the lineup, but how will the manager, he put managers, I think he means coaches, and the manager work with Wynn, Walker, Gorman, and others over the course of the season when they stumble and stall. Hopefully they won't, but it happens. And then he said, I wouldn't say this has been a strong suit for Ollie. In fairness, I don't know. I don't know that Ollie's been put in this position yet. And so now he is, where he's going to play the young players. And Kevin, they are going to stumble. There's going to be that. So it is up to that staff. How do you see that in terms of importance and as a major theme this season?
Well, it'll be two things to me. One of them obviously is just seeing how these guys respond to Brant Brown and how he responds to what they need at a given time, right? Because they're going to be some defensive struggles at times. I think for both Gorman and for Walker, probably less so for Mason Wynn. But that's why John Jay is on the staff, and I hope that John can help Jordan kind of settle down in the outfield. He has all the physical abilities to play out there. He can run. He's got a cannon for an arm. There's no reason he can't be at least a league average corner outfielder, and maybe even down the road better than that. And so there's that kind of side, right? How does the coaching staff help them with the specific things they're struggling with? But here's the thing where I don't want to say that it was Ollie's fault, because it's not. It's the situation of the team and what the team expects. But in the past, when those guys have struggled, they either sit or they go down. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's the thing that's going to change, or at least the way they're saying it. And if it doesn't change, you can mark that down as another thing that I'll be screaming about here on the Gashouse Gang. Those guys have to play. They have to play 140 games, 150 games. Sometimes there isn't just a magical fix. It's not a tweak. It's not going and looking at video. Sometimes you just have to play through it. And I think that's probably going to be what I judge the lineup making and judge Ollie on, and more than anything is, do you guys live up to what you said? Is this going to be a case where these guys have the runway to play through slumps without having the threat of sitting down or going back to Memphis?
Yeah, there's a timeline to struggles. That when a guy first starts struggling, maybe you give him a day and you get him back in the lineup.
Sure.
Struggles continue. You just keep running them out there day after day after day, hoping that they can fight their way through it. And then we've all seen it. You eventually get to a point where you pass the timeline and you got to do something else, whether it's taking them out of the lineup for an extended amount of time, sending them to AAA, finding an injury and getting them on the injured list, like whatever it might be. And it's different for every single guy. But I think generally speaking, the kind of the timeline that I just laid out is what it looks like. And what's going to happen with the Cardinals this year, to Kevin's point, or at least what should happen to the Cardinals, what they've told us is going to happen, that period of time between that one day off and then back into the lineup and something more extreme, that's got to be a much longer amount of time now. There's got to be a very long leash for guys to be able to work through their struggles.
This is the Gashouse Gang from KMOX with Matt Pauley, who joins us from Jupiter, Florida, and Kevin Wheeler in the studios of KMOX. I'm Tom Ackerman. We do have a lot of great questions that are going to be popping up here from YouTube, and I want to get to some of those if we can, and then there's some other stuff absolutely to dive into with regard to the Cardinals. I like this one from Ken. It's a decent question. Does Contreras go back behind the plate if an early injury happens, or do the Cardinals dip into the farm? It's a fair question, but I think Contreras' days of catching are pretty much done. I mean, this is going to be Herrera and Pius. Now, if they were to both go down, you have some young options, or you go sign somebody, or you do something. I guess you could, in a pinch, have Wilson. But Wilson's the first base. And I'm going to throw out a second one, and I'll let Matt start with this, and then Kevin can follow. Let me find it. So I had someone ask, not that it matters from a hitting perspective. This is from Ranman on Twitter. Not that it matters from a hitting perspective, but why wouldn't Burleson be first base and Wilson DH? Also, can we all finally accept that Arenado should be in the 6th or 7th spot? He's no longer 2017 Arenado. Well, 22 Arenado was an MVP candidate. That wasn't that far ago. I would not drop him that far. But anyway, that's a lineup question. Let's go back to Burleson. I answered it this way, Matt. I said Burley will see some time at first base, I would think. He'll also play left field, though, and so they're going to move him around. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the first one on Contreras, he's done as a catcher. In fact, Ollie talked about it today. He said that he thinks that Contreras' hitting is going to improve as a result of him not being forced to worry about all the stuff the catchers have to worry about, being in the game plan meetings and just everything that goes along with it. Contreras is going to be able to really focus in on hitting. So no, Jimmy Crooks, I would think, is going to be the first guy up when Ivan Herrera or Pedro Paez deals with an injury, which is probably going to happen. Very few catchers make it through the entire season. Crooks is probably the first guy. There's other guys in the organization that can step in if they need to. Contreras is done as a catcher. As far as that first base situation, Contreras is a really athletic dude. I think he's got the potential to be a very good defensive first baseman. I just put in, that's nothing against Burleson. I don't think we're going to see Burleson a lot in the outfield though, Tom. We don't hear any talk about that. I mean, with Arenado on this team and Brendan Donovan already being forced to the outfield and having Michael Ciani and trying to figure out that equation, as you know, Burleson was not a great outfielder in terms of, he was a very good, like his throwing arm is great. Once he got to the ball, he could throw guys out. But that's not his strong suit. And I think Contreras is probably going to be a better defensive first baseman than even Burleson would be.
Yeah, I think my point is, Kevin, that Burley could move there. Like if you needed to out of necessity, Contreras isn't going anywhere. He's first base or DH, period.
Yes, by plan, but they should keep that open as an emergency. Like, for example, we've always watched the Cardinals be really cautious about playing their backup catcher or one of their catchers as a DH, right? They've never liked doing that. They don't like having that risk. We've seen it was more Mike Matheny than it has been Ollie. I don't remember it being much of a thing with Ollie yet, but they always have hesitated to use catchers as pinch hitters because they're afraid that if something happens, they don't have a backup. Well, now they have a third guy. Now you can be more aggressive in that regard, because the chance of an injury happening late in a game like that is pretty low. But if it happens, you have Wilson who can do that. You have Wilson who can slide back there and do the job. That, to me, the only way, no way are you planning on him going back there, right? That's not like, you're not going to start him there. You're not going to be like, yeah, he's our backup, or he's going to be the option if one of them gets hurt. I completely agree. Jimmy Crooks is the obvious. They may stash another depth guy who's a kind of a veteran AAA guy that they can have in case Crooks is banged up himself or whatever. But the presence of Contreras as the first baseman should allow the manager to be more aggressive with how he deploys Ivan Herrera when he's not catching. It should. He's there. I mean, like, you literally have a valid third catcher as your starting first baseman. So be aggressive with the usage on Herrera. Get him DH time. Use him as a pinch hitter in a spot late in the game against a left-hander. Don't hold him back because you're worried that your catcher might get hurt, because there's no need for that now. You've got the emergency plan. You probably have the best emergency catcher in baseball in Wilson Contreras. But no, other than that, no, the plan would not be for him to go back there. I'll say this. The first base situation with Burleson and Contreras. Burleson doesn't move well. He doesn't have lateral quickness. He doesn't have first step quickness. He was better defensively last year as a first baseman than he was as an outfielder, mostly because he's an incredibly slow runner. Like, he's in the bottom 10% in sprint speed in Major League Baseball, so it's hard to be a good outfielder when you can't get to anything. But that lack of quickness plays at first base too, and he's fine there. I think Contreras has the physical abilities to be better than fine. He moves incredibly well. He's got lower body flexibility, which Burleson does not. And, think about what the job of a first baseman is. The hardest thing they have to do is pick and throws, and those things happen all the time. You're going to have Mason Wynn throwing 96-mile-an-hour rockets from shortstop that are going to have two-seam spin and sink. They're going to bounce. Who's got the reflexes and the lower body flexibility and the hands to do that and to do it well? The guy that was a catcher. So, yeah, I think – I don't know that he's going to be good, but Contreras has the skill set, the raw physical tools to be an exceptional first baseman.
Kevin, there were times last year where we saw Herrera and Paez in the lineup together when Contreras was on the injured list. I feel like Ollie went away from that fear of using both catchers. And if we're being really honest about this, let's go to a worst case scenario. Let's say you have Herrera and Paez in the lineup together and one of them gets hurt early on. The worst case scenario is you absolve the DH, and you're going to get 1, 2, 3 plate appearances from either a pinch hitter or a pitcher's just going to have to hit for himself. That's not the end of the world. Being scared to use those two guys together in the same lineup, game after game after game, the worst case scenario of that fear of one single game, you maybe being a little bit undermanned in one spot in the order, that is not a reason not to use.
No, I'm with you. I argued that when it was Mike Matheny doing it. I think that it's important to understand that that's your worst case. But in this case, you don't even have to get to that.
Right.
I would definitely do that after I would put Contreras in. Like that would be the plan after I decide, you know what, Wilson, get your gear, buddy. We need you for 3 innings today.
Let's throw a comment up there. Bill Morton asked, do you guys think if Walker and Gorman break out this season, do you see the Cardinals trying to lock them up long term? I would say probably not before Mason Wynn. Now, Wynn is 22. He'll be 23 next month. Walker's 22. Gorman's 24. So they're all generally around the same age. But Mason's got a step on them, don't you think, Kevin, in terms of locking them up and trying to, if they want to follow this Braves model,
yes,
they could go right down the line eventually.
100%. That should be their plan. They don't have any real long-term contracts. None. Who's the longest term contract they have for any real money right now?
Not much.
Sonny and Wilson. I mean,
probably, yeah. Sonny's 2 more years. What's Wilson? 3 more years?
Yeah.
Like, you've got tons of money. The only way the Cardinals can keep superstar players is to sign them before they hit free agency. If Mason Wynn plays his 6 years out and he's as good as we think he is, I mean, look at what Perdomo just got for Arizona. And Perdomo can't even hit. He's a terrible hitter. He's a great fielder, but he's not a good hitter. He just got, what did he get? Ended up getting, Matt, like $12, $13 million a year for a glove-only guy?
Yeah.
If Mason Wynn is anything close to what we just saw as a rookie, if he's just the same guy every year for the next 5 years, he'll be an $18 to $20 million a year player on the low end.
Was it that high for Perdomo? Because I want
to say it was like 4 and 46.
Yeah, it might be. I did the story this morning on KMOX, and I said that exact thing. I said something along the lines of, this could end up setting a parameter for Mason Wynn.
$45 million.
4 year 45. So you're getting $11 million a year for a guy in his career who I believe is a below average offensive player. I think for his career, he's like 15% below major league average.
Yeah. And a guy that you didn't have to do that with.
No, they got Jordan Lawler coming. It was a weird deal. But again, that all impacts things. So Mason Wynn is now 5 or 6 years down the road. That means if Mason Wynn doesn't hit at all in 3 years, he's worth $12, $13, $14 million a year. If he doesn't hit at all, because Perdomo doesn't hit at all. Yeah, I mean, I would be looking to get Mason Wynn signed long-term as soon as I can. Find a way to give the 2025 version of the Ozzie Albies contract or the Ronald Acuna contract or whatever. And if Walker has a stable 6 months, do the same thing. Gorman's a little bit more interesting. I think a little bit more difficult question in that regard because he's closer to free agency. He's arbitration eligible next year. So he'll only have 3 years of team control after this year, which means he's going to cost more, and he's had the ups and downs. So it really depends. Like if he goes out and hits 40 bombs, okay, let's talk. Let's see what it takes. But I would say win right now. That would be my priority if I'm Chaim Bloom. That would be like day one priority for me if I'm Chaim Bloom is I want to get this guy signed to a 7, 8, 9 year deal because I think what we've seen is his floor. And his ceiling is Barry Larkin. Like his ceiling is an elite all-star caliber player. And if you can lock that guy in at that position for the next 8 or 9 years, do it.
That's the challenge in all this, though, because we don't know what Chaim. I guess you can go back and look at his Red Sox days, but he never really got much of a chance there.
No, he didn't.
What's it going to look like with Chaim Bloom running the Cardinals, and how different is it going to be, and what is going to be his MO? Is he going to be the guy who's going to try to lock guys in and buy out arbitration years? Is he going to be somebody who's more willing to move on from those type of players and continue to be supplementing from the farm system and be very picky and choosy when it comes to players that they lock into long-term deals? We just don't know what the baseball operation is going to look like under him. And
as an example, I could see like getting to the end of this year if Gorman has a good year and be like, JJ Weatherholt's coming. We don't really want to commit an 8-year deal or something like that. So and they're not all 8-year deals. Maybe some of them will be, you buy out 1 year free agency instead of, 5 years of free agency or whatever. But the point is that I think that if they identify players that they feel are legitimate impact players, then the way to keep building this team moving forward is not to go out and shop in the mid-level of free agency to keep filling your roster. It's to lock your guys up. It's to lock the guys up that you think are really good. So if Herrera has a big year at the plate this year, lock him up. I don't care if you have more catchers coming. Teams always need catchers, man. You can always trade those. You can always use two of them. You can always DH somebody. I think that's the play rather than having to go get your impact from the outside like you have with Contreras and Arenado and Goldschmidt and on and on.
The Gashouse Gang, sponsored by Saliga Heating and Cooling and Game Day Men's Health with Matt Pauley and Kevin Wheeler. I'm Tom Ackerman. Glad you're listening to us on KMOX or on replay or watching us live on YouTube, where you should be subscribing to KMOX Sports or The Bernie Show. Our pal Bernie Miklasz, also part of this show, does his own video series. It's fantastic. Speaking of contracts, which we just talked about, the Boston Red Sox, the former team of Chaim Bloom, they are starting to get active here. So they've signed Alex Bregman. We know that. Now there's this drama going on behind the scenes. Rafael Devers told reporters, no, I'm not moving off third base. And I don't want to DH. I want to play third base. That's what I want to do. So that's gotten things stirred up. And then I just saw the betting favorite to land Vladimir Guerrero Jr., the early betting favorite when he becomes a free agent at the end of this year, is the Boston Red Sox. Now, there will be a lot of teams kind of jockeying for position there, Matt, but this is going to get interesting here where Vlad ends up going. He obviously has still a lot ahead of him, big booming bat, great family history. It's going to be interesting to see where he goes.
Dynamic player who can impact the game in a whole lot of ways. And I know we'll get to it, so let's touch on it. Does this guy fit in as a Cardinal? And that's actually where I think how the team plays this year could play. You know, I hate that I always bring up Milwaukee stuff because I was there for years, but in some ways what's about to potentially happen with the Cardinals reminds me of something. I believe it was 2017. The Brewers were pretty good. They didn't make it to the playoffs that year, but they were in playoff contention until 1 or 2 days left in the season. They weren't planning to contend, and then all of a sudden they had a pretty good season, and they completely changed their offseason, and that was the offseason where they went and got Christian Yelich and Lorenzo Cain because they said, we think that we can actually do something in the next year. They had a great year. They got all the way to Game 7 of the NLCS before eventually being knocked out by the Dodgers. So if I'm going to apply that standard to this standard, I think if the Cardinals do overachieve this year, if the Cardinals do find out that Jordan Walker and Nolan Gorman and guys like that can be middle of the order run producers, if J.J. Weatherholt gets here and he gets on the route of being an impact player, if Quinn Matthews and Mason Wynn and all these guys kind of do the things that we think they might do, and all of a sudden this turns out to be a pretty good team this year, that might move up the timeline a little bit where they've openly spoken about, yes, payroll comes back this year, but when they're ready to compete again, they're ready to go spend some more money. Maybe just, and it's a less than 50% chance. I think it's a bit of a pipe dream because it's going to take a lot of money and it's going to be probably a swimming pool that is going to be a little bit too big for the Cardinals. But if they do feel like, okay, this is the chance for us to jump back in, that would be a big time dynamic bat added to the team.
You think it's possible, Kevin?
Not really based on how they operate, but it should be. So look at the team's payroll. They only have $73 million on the payroll for next year as of right now, not counting arbitration and things along those lines. And I think it's only $45 million the year after that. And they don't have any long-term commitments beyond that. Now, like to me, that's a player you make the exception for. This is the argument that we had about Bryce Harper at the time that Bryce Harper was a free agent, right? Normally, I would not make that move if I'm the Cardinals. I wouldn't make that run on a 30-year-old free agent or a 32-year-old free agent or a 29-year-old free agent. When you get a guy that's 26, 27, who is at that level, that would be the exception. But do we think this team is going to go out and spend $500 million on a player? Because that's what it's going to take. Yeah. He's going to be $40 million a year for at least 12 years, if not 15 years. I mean, he's not going to get the $760 that Soto got, in part because he's a first baseman, and he's also not been as consistent as Soto has been. But he's going to be 2/3 of that at least, right? I mean, he gets out there in free agency, and you've got the Yankees who have first base opening up at the end of the year because Goldschmidt is a free agent at the end of the year. You have the Red Sox, although I think putting them as the favorites a little weird because Tristan Cassis might go hit 30 home runs this year, and then why would you sign a big money first baseman? But Houston could be in play on that. They've let some big guys walk away. They've got a lot of money. It's a franchise with money. Seattle needs a slugger. They might open up the bank. The Mets are always a threat. What if Pete Alonso opts out? You could easily see the Mets go out there and throw that kind of money around. Who else could be in that team? It could be the Nationals, because they've got a boatload of young guys, and that could be their anchor moving forward, and they have money. It's a big market. So if he's out there, you're going to be competing with at least 6 or 7 or 8 other big market teams that are going to be in the bidding for that. I don't see them going into that and winning it, but that's one of the guys you have to at least re-examine, right? You have to at least say, is this the path? Because how often do you have the chance to add a Hall of Fame caliber hitter? It's very rare. So yes, I would explore it. I wouldn't expect it. It would be crazy. Yeah,
this is one of those emails that I received from one of the sports betting sites, but I thought it was kind of fun anyway. They had the Red Sox at 3-1, Braves 4-1, Astros 6-1, Phillies 7-1, Cubs 9-1, Dodgers, Yankees 10-1. So kind of the usual suspects.
Keep in mind the Phillies. Kyle Schwarber is a free agent at the end of the year. JT Realmuto is a free agent at the end of the year. That's $50 million with those two guys right there.
After the Dodgers, Yankees, they went Padres, Giants, Mets, Mariners, Rangers, and then the Cardinals at 20-1. So kind of like right in the middle.
That's kind of where I'd put them. And to me, their general rule would be to not do this kind of thing. But for this player, I think you would. By the way, I realize with the whole Phillies thing, Bryce Harper's your first baseman. So, if Vlad wants to be a DH, he could go to Philly because they're not going to move Harper off first base.
Yeah, no, totally. I find that stuff interesting, though. I definitely do. Do you think, Matt, that there are any more moves? That would be move number 1 if they do it. Of course, they made a few minor moves here, but do you think there's anything that they will add or need to add before the start of the season here in spring training?
Wouldn't shock me if they brought in another relief pitcher at some point. That would be the one thing that I could see them doing. It's kind of a 50-50 thing. We'll probably see them get into Grapefruit League games and then see where they're at from there. A relief pitcher, there's still a lot of those guys out there on the market. If there's a right-handed bat out there that really looks good to them that they can get cheap, maybe that's something that they kick the tires on. But there's also not a whole lot of spots for those kind of guys at this point.
That's what I was going to say is I hear the team talking about those things. Who you bumping off the roster on the pitching side of things? Not that you don't have, not that you have, everybody's a sure thing, but are we giving up on Riley O'Brien? I don't know that this is a team that should be giving up on a guy that throws 100 miles an hour, right? We're not giving up on first of all, we haven't seen Nick Anderson yet, but a healthy Nick Anderson makes things interesting. We giving up on Roycroft, a 6'8" guy that throws 96. I think it's fascinating. If you're adding a reliever, is that person going to be any better than those guys could be? And wouldn't you be better off giving those younger guys who throw hard their opportunity? Now, the bench guy, I kind of wanted to ask you guys this, because I think the bench question, that right-handed bat, is interesting. Is that Michael Hellman, that guy that can play 6 positions and bat right-handed, even though he doesn't have a major league track record? Because who's the bench right now? Assuming that Herrera's starting catcher, let's just, for the sake of argument, we'll just go with him. Pajes is your catcher. Michael Ciani, if he's not in center field, and let's assume that Tom's lineup is the everyday lineup, right? Newt Barr in center field, Herrera's catching. So Pajes and Ciani are bench guys. Who else? Who are your other bench guys?
Not a ton. I mean, it's open.
Fermin's there, Baker's there.
Again, Hellman is an interesting guy because he can play 6 positions and run.
If they can find time for Sajasi, but there's definitely spots to
Jose Barrero.
We haven't seen it. Let's see what he looks like in Grapefruit League big game.
Yeah, he's very talented. He was at one time a top prospect. And again, we're talking about a bench guy. He plays short. He plays center field. But this is my point. There's room there, right? But if I'm going to go out and sign a Justin Turner, he just signed with the Cubs. But if I'm going to go sign a guy like that, I'd rather give that to Luken Baker.
Yeah.
The problem is Luken Baker doesn't give you any defensive ability at all.
Baker just has to show in spring, his ability to hit home runs against Major League pitching. That is his only route to be able to, home runs and doubles against Major League pitching consistently against left-handers, which we saw a little bit of a flash of it, but I don't think we saw enough of it for him to be guaranteed a job.
Yeah.
The Gashouse gang from KMOX. We are coming to you by way of Jupiter, Florida through Matt Pauley here in St. Louis, Kevin Wheeler, Tom Ackerman, where it is going to snow a little bit more today, and it is single-digit weather. Guys, talking about spring training and about pitching, I'm curious, Matt, what you're seeing down there in terms of swing and miss pitchers. This is something that we've talked about a little bit on the side and wondering if the Cardinals are going to try to ramp up that. I think for years we talked about the Cardinals pitching to contact, letting the defense make plays. Kind of like seeing some horsepower back there.
Yeah, and they're trying. I think that started in earnest last year with some guys they brought in. Obviously, that is Ryan Helsley. He's a swing and miss guy. Jojo Romero was a swing and miss guy for much of the year last year. Kevin just mentioned Riley O'Brien. You dream of what he can become. Same thing with a Chris Roycroft. There's not a lot of swing and miss in the rotation. I think Sonny Gray's strikeout rate was a little bit better last year than we expected it to be, but that's kind of it. The Cardinals have always lagged behind on that. I would assume that is going to change with the next regime, but even with this current regime, we're seeing a little bit more of it, and it's a big deal, especially for the playoffs. If you want to be a team that can go through deep playoff runs, you got to have pitchers who can get strikeouts.
And Kevin Quinn Matthews is absolutely a strikeout guy. The guy struck out 200.
He definitely was to the minors.
Last year. That's insane. That's like over 40% of the batters he faced.
Yeah, I mean, I would caution buying that too much because a lot of that was A-ball, a Stanford college guy, 22 years old, facing teenagers. But he did it at Double-A, so that means something. He did strike people out at Triple-A, even though he struggled. So I think he is a strikeout guy. I don't think he's that guy. I don't think he's the Blake Snell 240 strikeout guy. But he'll miss bats, right? I mean, he's got that ability with multiple pitches. His fastball is ticked up, so he's more in the mid-90s now than low 90s. The changeup is a killer. He's got the ability to do that. I'm still baffled by why it's taken so long. Like, why is it taken so long to come to the realization that it's a strikeout game and we need to strike people out? The Cardinals bullpen last year, I think, ranked 24th in baseball in strikeout rate. I think if we took the rotation in, I didn't look at that, but I know it would be way down there. Because you don't have anybody in the rotation other than Sonny that strikes anybody out. So I don't understand why it's taken so long. Like, to me, that should have been happening all along. And, look at their prospects. Now, Matthews definitely fits. He's a change in that regard. Tink Hence misses bats, but Tink hasn't thrown 100 innings yet. So we ain't going to see him as a major league starter anytime soon. But McGreevy's not that. Graceffo hasn't been that. It's really an odd thing to me that it's taken this long to get to it, but I'm hoping that the signs are pointing in that direction. And this is why when I bring up the bullpen, I don't have any need to see a veteran right-hander who's just a guy. Give me Riley O'Brien. Give me Chris Roycroft. Give me those guys who might miss some bats. I mean, they throw hard. This guy, Bailey Horn, that they picked up off of waivers, he's not been good, but he throws hard. He's a lefty throwing like mid to upper 90s. Give all of these guys their looks, man. Give Zach Thompson a look. Zach Thompson will miss bats. He'll be walking people, but he'll miss some bats.
A lot of things sometimes.
Right. He might miss the strike zone a lot too. But I think that there is some of that ability there, but you got to unleash it. These guys are 30 years old now. Riley O'Brien is going to be 30 this year. Roycroft is 26. Zach Thompson is 27. There's no more waiting around. This is the year to find out, what are they? Are they helpful? Are they pieces? Can we get something out of them? Can they give us a chance to compete better?
And, man, keep them healthy. I mean, what a great luxury of depth they could have in this bullpen, which was one of the better bullpens in the National League last year. They could have it all back even without Kittredge. Guys, coming up tonight is a special show. 6:30, I believe, is the start time for the City Spotlight, which is to ramp up excitement and preview this opener for City on Saturday. Saturday's going to be nuts. I mean, you got the Cardinals playing down there, Matt. You got the Blues playing here, City playing here, the Billikens playing here, Mizzou at Arkansas. Illinois is going to be at the Garden taking on Duke. I mean, that's just a crazy Saturday. What do you have in store today leading up to City Spotlight?
Yeah, so we'll do 6 to 6:30 standard sports open line. We'll go through everything that Oliver Marmol had to say today and just kind of talk through the narratives of the day. And then I'll hand things off to Jen Cease, and she'll get everybody ready for the City season, which begins, like you said, this Saturday, Tom.
It'll be exciting, and Dale Shilley will be part of that. And Kevin, you've got the DGS leading into all that.
By the way, we're doing this. Yeah, we're doing Gashouse Gang on video. We're doing that on DGS now. So we're going to be live on Facebook. I think eventually on YouTube and Twitter as well. But we're doing it live, so you get to see all of us clowning around.
I heard you guys were doing that. That's good.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
That'll take on a life of its own, without a doubt. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Matt, thanks for all the great stuff down in Jupiter, and we will catch you soon. Thanks to our producer, Drew Young. I'm Tom Ackerman. This has been the Gashouse Gang.